Okay.
Very good. Well, hello, Imhotep, and welcome. I'm Rod Morgan, and this is a special of the Ancient Egyptian Magic podcast, which we'll kind of explain in a moment. And I've got with me Michael Salihovic, who's written this very, very interesting book called Natural Meditation, A Secret School of Tantric Sadhana. Anyway, Michael, do you want to say something, introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about yourself?
Yes. Well, I will tell you a little bit of things which are actually related to this book and the content of this book, right?
Yeah.
It was somewhere in very early in my teenage years when I actually got interested in yoga as such. All right. I was growing up in a socialist Yugoslavia at the time, and we did not have much literature actually about the subject. I remember, I don't know, I was maybe 13 years old or something like that, and I told my mother that I would like to buy a book on yoga, if she could give me some money to buy a book on yoga. But I don't know where did I hear, how did I hear of yoga at all? Anyway, I managed actually to find some books, and I started practicing, asanas, pranayama, and so on. And later on, some advertisements for books on similar subjects appear in our mailboxes. It happened that a guy from Belgrade, the capital of Yugoslavia at the time, called Živorad Mihajlović, was writing books about yoga and hermeticism and so on. And I was interested actually only in his first book, which was called The Psychic Training of Hindu Yogis, because he advertised that there are some concentration and meditation instructions and so on, which I was interested in. But if you would order other books, you would also get that one with a discount. So eventually I ended up with also 2 books on Western Hermetic tradition. And it was really one of the key moments in my life, because that was the first time that I got introduced to the Golden Dawn and the Tree of Life and, all those Western Hermetic kind of practices, which affected my life pretty much later on. But my interest in yoga actually never subsided, right? And it was in those books again that he advertised a particular method of contemplation, which is actually a retreat, a group retreat called Enlightenment Intensive. And as I trusted the author at the time, because I was learning all the new stuff from his books, and I was very interested young man at the time, I also trusted him in his evaluation that Enlightenment Intensive is something to be tried, right? So when the first moment when I got an opportunity to actually attend an Enlightenment Intensive, and it was in 1985, I was astonished by the change that affected in me, and that the fact that in those 3 days, which are very similar to a Zen session, many of participants, including myself, were actually able to attain the type of experience that they would call Kensho in Zen. That was absolutely unbelievable. How is this possible? And
was that like an altered state?
Well, that's well.
Sorry, I was just gonna look for my pencil. What you're saying.
Yeah. Okay.
In all this excitement.
No problem. Well, I wouldn't call Kensho or enlightenment experience an altered state of consciousness, because it's not really the state of consciousness. It's rather a state of direct knowingness. One of the definitions of enlightenment as we use it in this kind of work is that it is a direct experience of truth, direct experience of how things are. And even the word experience is not really good in that, because the word experience also implies some sort of process going on. And here we are talking about a subjective state of direct knowingness, so it's rather expanded awareness rather than altered awareness. In any case, of course, I learned about the man who started with Enlightenment Intensives as a practice, the creator of Enlightenment Intensives. So I was interested to find out a bit more about what is he doing, what else he can teach.
And who was that? Who was that?
That was an American called Charles Berner.
Charles Berner.
Charles Berner. He was born in 1927, I think, in California, and he died in Australia in I think 2007. And I found out that he was teaching a very interesting program called Holistic Yoga Program, which was not only about asanas or only about meditation or so on, but about whole of the life, integrating various aspects of life and balancing them. And that all of that actually culminated in what he was calling surrender meditation or natural meditation. And that's actually where my interest in that particular school of meditation started to grow. But it wasn't until many, many years actually after that I was actually able to learn that from a qualified teacher, and get, let's say it, like initiated into that type of practice. Although traditionally it is actually in India, it was always transmitted through a form of initiation, usually called Shaktipat.
Yeah. Well, so the intensives, there's something other than the intensive. I quite like the idea. I was quite taken with the idea of the intensive because, as you know, I've kind of been around on the Western esoteric scene and everything, which tends to be organized in magical orders and groups and whatever, which on the whole, right, probably they tend to fail after a while, or they don't suit everybody. And I think maybe the movement at the moment is a little bit of a crossroads in how to organize itself, because the traditional methods of covens and the orders have kind of had their day, or maybe people have had enough of them or whatever. So I kind of thought the idea of an intensive, not a kind of overall life commitment to something. My understanding of it would be that it was like you'd come together and you'd do this particular thing and you'd learn something, and as you say, you'd have this amazing experience or hopefully this Gnostic step forward in your own personal journey.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. Intensives are really rather are like a form of initiation, something to push you forward, to put your feet on the path, because intensives are not a system, and they're not really a part of some system or order or something like that. It's just a retreat, but
you must be using a particular set of techniques like a system. It must be, when you say it's not a system, but surely there must be, as in the book, really. I suppose the book is telling you, here's a set of techniques that you might explore. You don't see it as a system as such. It's a bit more random, or what?
The intensive as intensive, that particular method of work is not a system, and it's not formally a part of some school or system. But Charles was teaching it as one single part of the overall system of holistic yoga that he was teaching. So while he was alive and while he had his school in place, we could say that Enlightenment Intensives were part of his system or his school. But at the same time, intensives are being given nowadays more or less all around the world by independent practitioners, and never advertised as part of some particular school, religion, or system, As such, as I said, it's a good tool. It's a good awakening tool. All right. But what somebody will do afterwards with their own life, that's on the people. So if we would speak about the good sides and bad sides of that type of practices, the bad side would be that afterwards people are actually left to themselves and what they know. So those who are lucky enough to have some good teacher or to be part of some valid spiritual school, let's say, after intensive, they will be able to continue with their own practices, in a more deeper and meaningful way.
Right.
And there'll be, on the other hand, a good side of the type of practice.
So it's not tied to any particular mythos or
No.
when I first posted the book in, as you know, we're both involved as well in this East-West group called Amukos. And someone kind of said they'd heard that at one of these intensives in maybe it was in Yugoslavia, I'm not sure.
Yeah, it's not in Yugoslavia, but I think I saw the same advertisement.
Yeah, and said that, but the effect of the intensive, even though they were using these set of ideas or techniques and initially derived from Hindu esoteric tradition, that a lot of the stuff became part of the Typhonian, what we call the Typhonian tradition. Or as a lot of Typhonian material that kind of emerged, so there's no control over which is good. I mean, what might emerge. Did that ring a bell for you? What was said there?
I know what you're talking about, and there's actually a little bit of confusion around it. So let me try to clarify if I can.
Yeah.
First, intensive is most similar to practice of sesshin practice in Zen. For those who don't know, sesshin is a period of time, usually 3, 5, or 7 or more days, when Zen practitioners gather together and meditate intensely. They practice Zazen since early dawn until late in the evening, with breaks for meals and so on. The same thing is being done on intensive, except that they do not meditate individually, but in pairs. There is a specific communication technique used. And the only goal of the intensive is awakening experience, or kansho in Zen, So it is no dogma is being taught. It's not
no dogma, yeah.
Exactly. It's not part of any mythos, as you mentioned. It's not part of any system. However, people who were already in some mythos or in some system, of course, after they discovered intensive as a method, they integrated it. And they started applying it within their own context. So today we have an example, for instance, that some people who were the students of Osho Rajneesh and who run Osho Rajneesh centers and so on, they adopted enlightenment intensives. They did some little changes to it, and they practice it as part of the program of their centers. In Yugoslavia, this same Živorad Mihailovic, who was also an occultist and esotericist, and he was a member of Typhonian order, and at one time he was also representative of the Typhonian order for then Yugoslavia. He was apparently quite close with Kenneth Grant. He loved intensives, and he practiced them a lot, and he was offering them as part of his work with his group. But he also introduced many changes to it based on how he understood it should be done. Now I'm not saying is it good, is it bad. He just introduced those changes. And he and a lot of people around him, they also introduced a lot of their own ideas into that work. All right. So it is not really a type of practice that sort of fits too much with things that Grant was writing about, although it does on the other hand, but it's not like something that somebody would call a traditional occult or esoteric practice. It is more like an awakening tool.
I think when I was involved with the Typhonian, I think there was always a lot of interest in meditation techniques and Buddhist thing. I think the current head of the Typhonian order, as it's called these days, he's quite into, in a way, he's even though it's called the Typhonian order, which is named after this Egyptian entity, really called Set, is another name for the god Set. That the main practice or the one they quite often write about anyway, and you see it in the literature, is a kind of form of Zen Buddhism. Or certainly the main practice is to do with what they call it the fire snake, which is to do with Kundalini and raising Kundalini and certain sort of practices they have for doing that. So there's obviously a lot of leakage between the different systems. And the way I look at it, why we're kind of, I feel happy about doing this as part of the Egyptian Magic podcast, because magic, an Egyptian system, just like it needs a system of meditation, and it had one in ancient Egypt, and there was these connections between India and Egypt, of course. So this thing I call East-West now, this sort of blob really of ideas that sort of spreads across all these different things. So one way or another, if you practice these systems as sort of late Egyptian magic, you need a system of meditation. And I think that's what happened within the Typhonian order. I think other systems as well. I think in the Temple of Set, some of the people who left that and formed other groups, they kind of migrated from an interest in the Egyptian deity Set to Tantrism, really. They kind of they've become much more overtly into, I think, in Nicholas Schreck, I think, in his Demons of the Flesh thing.
Yeah.
So I think I think we're happy not to put too impermeable a barrier between the different traditions. You need to know this sort of stuff.
I think that we are in a unique period in human history, when the flow of information and contacts between people and between nations, and learning about other cultures, and when learning about other people's cultures, we also learn about their religions and their understanding of life, their experiences of what life is, what ultimate is. It all gets crisscrossed, and we came into a position nowadays, in my opinion, when it is really hard to be a pure follower or student of just one system, school, or religion. And maybe we can have one or even two, which we hold dear to our heart, right? But we can learn so much about those, about that particular tradition that we follow, from learning about others too, and then we find out, okay, if I'm a Jewish, or I don't know, whatever, and study Kabbalah and Jewish mysticism and all of that, at the same time learning about yoga, and about what's happening there, can shed a lot of light on what's happening in some esoteric trance in Judaism, then learning about this, learning about that. I think it's really, really hard to be, I think that one really has to have enormous strength of will to be dogmatic.
Yeah.
You have to
you need the gaps, let's say the Western, if you want to be into the Western esoteric tradition purely, but it was always, there were so many gaps in it anyway. You had to look to the East, to India, and to the Egypt and all that, to kind of fill the gaps in, just to work out how you actually make these things work, because our own tradition, certainly when I started out, it was kind of lost, really. I mean, people would be, and the language, of Hinduism about the chakras and the energies, and it's difficult to get by without that sort of language, really. People, even if we're writing a book about something that's come, from Northern Europe or wherever, they still need to say, well, it's like a chakra, or it's like the sort of serpent energy or whatever. Otherwise, people won't understand what you're on about. So I think it's completely, you're right, really. It's too late. It's fine. I think the magic has probably always been like that.
I think
maybe we should talk a bit more about the book, though.
Yeah, that's right.
Tell me the plan of the book.
What the book does. This last thing, because it will also touch on the book, really.
Yeah.
I think we were talking really about two things, which we can discern. One is that meditation is a universal human experience.
Yeah.
And It's not like, I mean, there can be million techniques, so-called, meditative techniques, but the essence of that meditative experience and, what meditation is, it's a universal human experience, that we can find it in every tradition, every time, every nation, and so on. And the second thing is that we all share the same nature, which is kind of same as saying that the truth is the same for everybody. There is one truth, right?
Yeah.
So whether is it a Hindu or an American native or some guy in Western Africa or whatever, if they come to meditation, by whatever means, and if they come to insights about the true nature of human reality, eventually what they come up with will be similar, and then we can find similarities between, what Navajo Nation was talking about and what Tibetans were talking about, because we are talking about the same reality, and that is what this book is about, really. Because it is titled Natural Meditation. It means that it is a natural means of coming to that meditative state. Not in this particular case, not by using will, not by using a technique, but by surrendering to whatever we conceive as being the absolute.
What would is there unnatural then? What would be an unnatural? Is a bit forced, you mean?
The unnatural quotes,
Yeah.
would be the use of will.
Yeah.
So give you an example. What we usually call meditation techniques are actually not techniques of meditation. They are techniques to lead us to meditation.
Mm-hmm.
For example, if we decide to practice something like holding attention on the breath, all right, which is a very common practice in yoga, but especially in Buddhism and so on. That very simple practice of, I think, anapanasati, they call it in Buddhism. Holding attention on the breath itself is not meditation per se. It's a technique. But if we succeed in doing that, and if we succeed in having prolonged times of perfect concentration or dharana on breath for extended period of time, we may glide or enter into dhyana or state of meditation. So in one hand, meditation is actually a state to be achieved, and to achieve that, we use a particular technique. We usually call those techniques meditations, but that's language, okay?
Yeah.
So trying to enter that state of meditation forcefully by using our will should be, quote, unnatural, all right?
Yeah.
It doesn't mean that we shouldn't do it, because we have to exercise and practice our will to come to a point when we will realize that will can go just this far. And when we realize that we cannot force truth, that we cannot force God, that we cannot force enlightenment, we may be ready to open up and surrender to it. And that's the point when we discover that there is some force which appears not to be ours.
Not to be what?
Not to be us, not to be
outside of us.
That's outside of us. And that is what was called Kundalini.
Yeah.
And when that force starts acting after we opened the door to it, and through surrender and purification process, we allow it to act, then we talk, oh, Kundalini is ascending, or this or that is happening. So I strongly disbelieve that it is really possible to awaken Kundalini in any willful, forceful means.
It's a purely natural state of ecstasy. Would you say it's a state of ecstasy, Kundalini? Of joy or
well, I would say
transcendence? What is it?
I would say that states of ecstasy or joy or something can come up as a side effect
Right.
of awakening of that energy, but not necessarily.
So you mean you don't kind of set out, the idea of setting out to kind of raise Kundalini, that really doesn't make sense, you don't think? That would be self-defeating.
No, and yeah, maybe it could be even harmful in some ways from the perspective of this particular tradition. This particular tradition thinks like this. We are growing up. We are going through different stages of development, in our life as a one cycle. We have like smaller cycles of development, and our life as one cycle is within larger cycles and so on. And as we grow and develop and complete those cycles during our lifetime, we gradually develop our body, we develop our mind, we develop our feelings, we develop our different abilities. We deal with life, we deal with the world, right? And at some point, sooner or later, we become either interested in absolute truth, God, however you want to call it, or we become disillusioned with our willful abilities to achieve things in life, and we become ready to start surrendering to that higher reality which is beyond ourselves. And then a teacher empowers that process through what is called Shaktipat. Shaktipat is really translated, it means, as far as I know, gift of Shakti or energy, right? Basically, he starts a sort of energy process in you, which leads you to experience of surrender. After that, you are supposed to cultivate that through daily regular practice of surrender sadhana. And that will lead you into further experiences along that path. Usually, after a while, one is really on his own, unless there is some really, really advanced teacher of that sadhana who can be in the role of an advisor and helper. But if there is not, it's really an endeavor between you and the divine.
So is that like a conversion thing, though? Like a kind of religious conversion, the Shaktipat?
I have not been thinking about it that way, but I would say there are many similarities. It's a very interesting notion.
Yeah, but I can relate to that. From various religious experiences I've had in the past, they're often facilitated by other people. Which there's nothing wrong with, but they open a door for you, and it's difficult to predict why that would happen at that particular moment. Obviously they're kind of maybe they're charismatic or whatever, or it's the right time. I mean, there's this thing with Crowley with his students. Most of the time he wasn't very good, but he said something to someone. I think they were talking about this sort of breakthrough sort of stuff in the context of actually an Egyptian ritual, the Libasamek, I think. Or this is how it came about. And I think Crowley just said something to him about the union of your conscious and unconscious mind, that meditation for him, right, is what it was, that was the unification of the conscious and unconscious mind. And it was whether that's true or not, for that particular person, it was what they needed to know. It was a huge breakthrough for them. They kind of, in a way, they were struggling with this thing about willing it to happen and, struggling, make the magic happen, make the altered states happening. And it was too forced.
Yeah.
But that simple, Crowley, in a moment of wisdom, kind of removed all that and allowed the person to kind of just then enter a natural state of gnosis. They just went by themselves and thought about it.
Yeah, is it a story? Is it a story about that guy who later formed GBG order in the US?
Yeah.
I don't know, I forgot, but I think
Uh,
that it was a story about him when he was in Cefalu
in Cefalu with, and that's how they wrote Liber. He wrote Liber Samek, which is a very popular, or was for a while, popular ritual amongst magical people of a certain type. Not to make it happen, I don't think, but to kind of just sort of consolidate it for him. So he
Yeah.
wrote that ritual, but the process of the breakthrough, what you use the Sanskrit term jhana, meditation, was just something that spontaneously happened,
Mm.
partly from the charisma of Crowley on that particular day, and just hitting on the right thing for that particular person, so that they could work it out for themselves. Really, that's the natural process.
Yeah.
So yeah, no, I think you're onto it's a real good clarification of what magic is about, because so much of it
There's a lot of
is this sort
misunderstanding.
of forcing it willful. You're going to use your human will to kind of break through to the other side, but somehow or other it doesn't seem right. It is you're saying go the opposite way, kind of relax in a way. Is it the same as
Well,
relaxing, do you think? Or
well, deep relaxation would lead to surrender sadhana, right?
yeah,
And you have to relax, of course. But it just crossed my mind that, I mean, even in that Western esoteric context, you know, there is that tradition, so to speak, that at a certain point, the initiate must actually look for knowledge and conversation of the holy guardian angel, and
yeah,
that it's that holy guardian angel which then empowers the initiate and lead him further on the path.
right,
It's similar to saying that up to a certain point, one is using one's will, but at
yeah,
one point, one must open up and surrender to that holy angel from God to be led further. All right. So that's there is a kind of a parallel there. And there is a lot of misunderstandings also about Shaktipat. There is too much mystification about it. It is really a transference of energy which can happen in many ways. You know, if somebody has a qualified teacher, who can do that through a form of some initiation ritual or something, that's perfectly fine. But it is absolutely not uncommon, that people experience Shaktipat or awakening of that energy through their own practice, or even through relation to some divinity or God or whatever.
right,
It's actually very common in this tradition and in India to believe that one can receive Shaktipat from God directly.
right,
It need not be through a guru. So, but the point of that is that something opens up and awakens in an individual. There is some arousal of energy which pushes you forward into the new stages of meditation, and that's what counts, really.
right. Okay. Well, it is a very, very interesting material. I mean, as I say, could bring it back to the Egyptian thing, because it's like the famous Pharaoh Ramesses II. He, in a sense, he had this moment of what they call personal piety now, right? Of direct revelation. I know you kind of people expect that with the Egyptians, but it actually wasn't that common for the sense when it actually happened on the battlefield. He was in the middle of some battle, and he had this kind of personal perception, personal connection with God, that God was there for him, and everything was real. And it was very personal connection between him and God, and that was a kind of breakthrough moment, because he's for everybody in Egypt, but certainly for him, it was a very. So it just shows, these sort of things have been happening over the years. You've got this system, but this individual kind of eruption of meditation and of the Godhead in each individual is it's a great idea, I think, and it sort of takes the pressure off as well. I think if you think you've just got to kind of relax and sort of go with it in some stages. But you also got to, there's the thing, you've got to know things as well. You never completely get rid of having to know lots of really complicated stuff. But I suppose it helps. Well,
if you look into any tradition in the world or any religion or so on, you will find some traces of this surrender to God practice.
Yeah, no, I think you're right. I think it's a really important idea. As I was also thinking about W.B. Yeats, the famous poet here, and he writes in one of his poems that the big moment of revelation, one big moment when he actually burned with this kind of Kundalini energy, happened to him when he was I think he was just in a cafe having a cup of coffee, you know, in a cafe in Dublin, and suddenly by himself, just thinking without too much, you know, whatever preparation, and suddenly he kind of, for minutes, he was just burning with inspiration. He just realized you'd say he entered a state of dhyana, really, without doing anything much, just relaxing and without too much expectation. So I think so with the book, so the book sort of, we've talked about the intensives, but from the book you can kind of work your way. There are things certainly you can sort of practice certain things here, right? It will explain how to at least you know, set this whole thing up. Yeah, is that right?
Pretty much. You know, the reason why we mentioned intensives, and I have a chapter about it in this book.
Yeah.
We also spoke about surrender meditation, and it is explained in one chapter in the book.
Yeah.
There are also other things, is because I believe that one has to have a certain wins and experiences with willful practices before one embarks onto this surrender to God path. Right.
So you can never completely get rid of the unnatural
you
willed element of it.
It is like this, you know, if I want to surrender my Mercedes-Benz to God, I first have to have Mercedes. You know, I cannot go and say, oh God, I surrender this Mercedes to you and I don't have anything to eat. You know, first we have to get something. First we develop our will if we want to surrender that will. Right. So the book contains in itself actually kind of a guide through ethics practices and meditation techniques and practices which actually can lead one to the point when surrender becomes a meaningful practice.
Yeah.
You know, not an attempt to run away from the world. You know, some people may be attracted to the whole idea or concept of natural meditation because, oh, I don't want to do anything. I was using my will all my life and I never succeeded. And now I just want to, you know, surrender. It doesn't work really that way. You know, there are actually some qualifications traditionally in Hindu scriptures about who should be initiated into surrender sadhana. And they are qualified along the lines of bhakti and karma and jnana, you know. So somebody who exceeds in bhakti, who is so devotional that his devotion is really very accomplished, is appropriate, he could be initiated. If somebody is so good in willful techniques and in doing things, you know, that he perfected something, even artists could be in that category, could be ready for this sadhana. Or somebody whose intellect is so developed and whose understanding of things is so developed and they're very proficient in scriptures, in science, in this and that, they could also qualify, you know. So we see that some sense of accomplishment, you know, in material aspect of life is something that qualifies somebody for this next level of the game, so to speak. And that's why it was necessary in this book actually to have several chapters on willful practices and one chapter on surrender meditation. You know?
So you always got to know something.
Yeah.
There's always something to learn and to develop and practice. but in the end, but to set you up for the fact that in the end it's a natural thing.
Yeah.
It's the paradox of all magical systems, really, which is fine, and which you've done an amazing job at putting together this material, which is, as I say, is a sort of quite a good guidebook to all the different steps and things that you might do to put yourself. Plus, there's the idea as well that maybe there's the intensives. You maybe they could contact you if they were interested in.
Yeah, I think that there is an email address at the end of the book.
There's an email address if people want to read the book and then sort of maybe get the idea. The intensive would be a way of kind of consolidating some of the ideas in the book and dealing with things that probably best not dealt with in a book, but you need sort of a more personal approach, and that sort of thing can happen in a.
They can always.
Excellent stuff.
Right.
Is there anything? So we're coming to the end of our segment. Is there anything you wanted to add then before we'll come back another? Because I know you're doing other work on it. You just say this book kind of came up completely by accident, didn't it? I was asking you about something else, and I said, "What's that?" And
that's a good thing about it. That's
this is a natural book.
It's very natural book. Yeah, actually, you and I had a talk, right? We had a conversation, and I was mentioning this lineage that I'm initiated into, and you suggested to me, why wouldn't you write something about it?
Yeah, because
maybe I could, maybe I could, and I just sat down and wrote it. There was no really a plan to do that book. So that's one charming detail about it, which I like.
It obviously needed doing because already people have kind of found it quite important. There's obviously loads of people are interested in meditation. It's a very popular thing, and guidance to that, and just the title. But it's obviously in this particular tradition as well. It's interested people.
Well,
we'll be back again to talk about some other things.
I think the
next project and things, but
I think this book could give people some new perspectives on meditation in general.
Well, that's the idea, and everybody needs that. Whatever your mythos or your particular tradition, meditation of one sort or another is always seems to play a role in it. In the breakthrough, probably the major method by which people make progress in magical and religious world, really. So you need it. You need as much guidance as you can get on it as well. Such a simple technique, but it does need, it needs something like this. Okay.
Well, the most simple techniques are usually those, or paths or methods or whatever, are usually those which are most difficult to apply.
Yeah. And sometimes it's deceptively simple. That's true. You go back to the thing at the beginning. That moment, because we spend a lot of time thinking about these things, but to go back to the simplicity of something, that it's there in you somewhere.
We were growing
just
up.
Let it out.
We were growing up. We were becoming more and more complex, more and more complicated, and then out of all that complexity, we suddenly have to go back into absolute simplicity, and then it appears to be a daunting task.
And that's applicable wherever the system. Okay, well, thank you very much for appearing in the book. Natural Meditation, A Secret School of Tantric Sadhana is available from Magick, but also easier for a lot of people to get it via Amazon or wherever you get your books. Amazon being ubiquitous, I suppose, but does a good job of getting things all over the place. But and support your local bookshop as well. Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you, Mog.